My name is Bob Donlin. I'm very grateful to be here to share something that will hopefully be useful to all of you. It actually is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because it's a problem I myself had to solve about a year ago. I also just want to say I'm very grateful to be on the West Coast. I'm originally from New York City. I live in San Francisco now. And, in light of what's happening back in New York, it's very nice to be here, although I will say that when I left my home yesterday to fly down here, my neighbor on my way out, my next-door neighbor, who's a seismologist at Stanford University, handed me a big pamphlet on earthquake preparedness and said, "You should really read this." I said, "Why?" "Oh, we've been having a lot of little earthquakes lately, It could be something, sign of something." I'm like, okay. So maybe I will change my mind later on and decide to take the hurricanes. In any case, this is a pretty short session. It's a half an hour, so I am going to go through this pretty quickly. But as you know, the session will be archived. I'm also going to be providing my slides, which the conference is going to be putting up on the website as well. So should you care to download the slides. We had to switch from my Mac over to a Windows machine, so the fonts aren't quite they don't look the way they should, and some things may actually run off the slide a little bit. So just bear with me as we go, if that's okay. I've been actually attending this conference since the year 2000, which is pretty amazing to think about. I've been producing videos since 1983. Been working in online videos since 96. I was a digital video evangelist for Adobe from 2005 to 2008. And then in 2008, I founded a site called Adobe TV, and I ran that until last year when I left and joined a company called Wrecking Ball Media Group. I'm also an author trainer. I've written several books on the topics of video production. Most recently, I wrote the Classroom in a Book for Adobe Production Premium CS6, which is their video production suite. And my main job today is I manage the online video practice at a creative agency called Wrecking Ball Media Group. And so I kind of handle the business, technological, and creative sides of online video for our clients. My personal philosophy when approaching any type of project is to look at it as if it were a puzzle. And I have two small children, and I think it's kind of like my 5-year-old taught me this, as I was sort of I was wrestling with a problem for a project, and I was getting quite frustrated. He could see that, and he was asking me why I was frustrated. Well, I had to explain it in the terms a 5-year-old can understand. Well, it's kind of like a puzzle. You're working on a puzzle, and you're looking for the right piece, and you're trying to fit it, and sometimes it doesn't fit, and you have to try another one. And so that's kind of how I approach things holistically when I'm trying to solve a problem at work. So the puzzle that I'm going to be sharing, hopefully some solutions with you today, is to kind of get a grip on, what I like to call user-generated content in the enterprise. And really quickly, by a show of hands, how many of you folks are on the education side or from educational institutions? All right, quite a lot. And how about on the business end? Okay, the rest, of course. Okay, great. So it's about 50-50. That's great. I think this applies really regardless of whether you're in the business world or the education world. This is kind of I'm going to set up the scenario that I was faced with. This is the homepage of Adobe TV, and it's effectively an instructional portal that offers instructional content on all the various Adobe products. And we built a television studio, and there's a team of professionals that produce hundreds of hours of content produced by professional presenters. It all looks really great. You'll see in the center there Paul Tranny, who's one of the evangelists at Adobe, one of the main presenters. And so we're spending, literally millions of dollars a year creating all of this high-quality branded content. And then at the same time, various individuals throughout the company. Oh, the clicker has, whoa. Looks like we lost the laptop. Okay. This might be a little waving my arms around. All right, let's try and bring this back. Sorry, folks. Little technical issue. Let's see. Okay. And I am not familiar with the Windows version of PowerPoint, so let's see. How do we get this back into slideshow mode? Can anybody help me? F5. Thank you, F5. All right, thank you very much. You've taught me something. There we go. Thank you. This is Paul Trani's YouTube page, and where the problem that, well, it wasn't the problem, the situation was that a lot of individuals in the company started creating and putting up their own videos, some of various qualities, varying degrees of quality. You can see on the bottom, he put up a video called "Fish Cleansing My Feet in Tokyo." So, you know, the point is that all of this video, regardless of whether it's produced professionally or not, represents your brand. It does. People see it, and they're not necessarily going to differentiate that it's something created by an individual, not someone who produces video professionally. And if the bigger your organization gets, the bigger this problem gets. And the less likely it is you can rein this problem in, or this situation. I shouldn't call it a problem. So at least the approach that I took was, if you can't beat them, join them. Help them do a better job at it. And this does not mean you're going to make professionals, professional video producers out of these individuals. What it means is that there are a lot of things you can do, some basics you can show them and help them with to help them do a much better job. And that's the idea. So what I'm going to cover basically kind of falls under this philosophy, is that teach them just the basics. And I'm not talking about basics in terms of necessarily what equipment to use, although I will talk about that somewhat. The basics in terms of the craft of producing videos. There's some fundamental things that you can teach people that are going to go a long way to helping make their content better. Gear matters a little, because today most of the gear on the market, most of the cameras on the market, can get you really good quality. I mean, you can make really good quality using a modern iPhone camera. It's really the craft that I think is the most important thing to help these people out with. And I think anyone could grasp these concepts. So we're going to cover some specific scenarios, or I'm going to relate some tips for some specific scenarios. The first one is a presentation, and this could be a teacher giving a lecture or a class. This could be a business professional giving a sales presentation. And maybe they're using slides, maybe they're using a demo, something that goes along with that. The other scenario is an interview, which is quite similar, but of course there's a second person involved, the interviewer and interviewee. The assumption is that the presenter is also, or maybe a friend of theirs who's a non-professional, is going to be shooting the video themselves. And also most of what I'm going to cover, I think, can be applied to other scenarios, not just these two. But these are the main ones that I find are most common in enterprise and educational scenarios. So these are kind of the 6 basic things that I'm going to discuss. And again, these slides are all going to be available on the website, so I'm going to go through these pretty quickly in the time that I have. So certainly please feel free to download them and review if you think any of this would be useful to you. The first one is outlining the content, because that's the content itself is really the most important thing. You know, what is the content? Is it clear? Is it to the point? The second, is it being presented well, right? So a few things about on-camera presentation skills and interviewing skills. How do you conduct an effective interview? Then we're going to talk about audio, shooting technique, and editing. And there's a reason why I put audio before shooting technique, because my belief is that audio actually is even more important than video in many cases in terms of improving the quality, or at least the basic steps people can take to improve the quality of what they're doing. So let's start with outlining. So there's a traditional rule, or a rule in traditional presentations, like a PowerPoint presentation that I'm giving to you right now, that I learned from Guy Kawasaki, who's one of the early Apple people and an evangelist in technology. And I saw him give a presentation at Adobe, and he had this thing he called the 10-20-30 rule for traditional presentations, and that he thought in a business presentation, make it 10 slides, have it last 20 minutes, and 30-point type, right? So the point is keep it really short to the point and make the type legible so people can read it. And you notice I'm advancing through these slides with big type. That's kind of the style I like to present with. Now with videos, I like to kind of translate that to videos, because I think for many videos that analogy actually holds true. I call it 5-5-50. So the idea is 5 bullet points, make the video 5 minutes or less, and 50-point type. And again, the actual size of the type isn't the point. The point is to make if you're using text, make it large and easy to read, and don't clutter the screen with a lot of stuff for people to read, because it generally, A, isn't legible, and B, tends to distract the viewer. So in terms of outlining, I think that, again, these are just rules of thumb, right? You know, there's going to be exceptions, but I think good rule of thumb is, you know, for a non-professional, limit your video to 5 bullet points. You want to get 5 points across, make it 5 minutes or less. And if you really need for it to be longer, and of course, especially in the education space, there's a fact that there's a lot of topics you can't cover in 5 minutes, but you might want to consider breaking that video up into multiple parts. Again, it's going to depend on a case-by-case basis. And then the point about text is really just a matter of making text succinct and legible. That's the concept. That's the idea I'm going for. It's just a rule of thumb. Now, in terms of presentation skills, and you know, I think people who are naturally used to being in front of an audience, who are good presenters in person, that can generally translate to being on camera. There are some people who, you know, aren't necessarily as comfortable in front of a camera. There are some people who are, you know, need a little bit more help in this area. I think they're just some basic tips in terms of improving the presentation skills. The first one, obviously, is to practice your content. This is a natural thing, is to rehearse. Rehearsing in front of a mirror, I find, is really useful. Just literally standing in front of a mirror and giving your presentation to yourself. Because especially I think people who are used to presenting on stage like I'm doing to you in front of an audience, that is something where you get feedback. I'm getting feedback from you right now just by looking at your faces. Are you awake? Are you listening to me? Are you nodding your heads? Are you looking at your computer falling asleep? I can gauge that and I can adjust accordingly. Can't do that when you're on camera. You know, you don't have that feedback. You don't have that same kind of energy. Sometimes rehearsing to yourself, even though you can't gauge your own feedback, I think can be a really useful way to get kind of prepared for presenting on camera. Even better than that is rehearsing to a colleague, is sitting in a room and just giving your presentation to somebody else. And of course, getting feedback. Because that, like in anything, even if you're acting, whatever, getting some kind of feedback from somebody else on what you're saying, how you're saying it, do you have good energy, et cetera, I think is really, really useful. Now, another tip that I like to give people is that when you do sit down and present, is to just tape your bullet points below your lens. Just make an index card or something small, tape your 5 bullet points, and just right below the lens so that you have a reference. It can keep you on track as you're presenting, keep you from rambling, et cetera. I will say this, and this isn't, again, I'm trying to keep it basic, but as time goes by, the teleprompters that are on the market are getting cheaper, the ones that run off of like an iPad. You can get them for a few $100. Those are also sometimes good to get into the mix, although I wouldn't go that far yet, but it is something that occurred to me today. And then just the direction to look through the lens at your audience. And some of this is kind of having to visualize, but looking through the lens and literally imagining somebody's on the other side. When I started presenting, because I had a background of speaking as an evangelist for Adobe, and then I had to start presenting on camera, and I personally found it useful to imagine a person. I would usually imagine my wife, because, you know, warm, friendly face, but behind that lens. And that can also be really useful bit of advice to give to somebody who has to present that's not a professional. Really look through the lens and imagine your audience is right there. So kind of recapping the presentation skills, it's practice. Practice in front of a mirror, in front of a colleague, get feedback, tape the bullet points beneath the lens, and really speak to your audience and try to visualize that. I was a musician in a former life, and making the transition from performing in front of an audience and then performing in a studio, I found the same thing to be helpful, was to pretend I was on stage, and it actually, I think, helped the recording sound better. But of course, now I'm here telling you this, so maybe that's... Anyway, enough of that. Interviewing skills. Some basic things that I think are useful when you're teaching people how to conduct an interview. I think the same outlining rules can apply. The point of 5 bullet points, 5 questions. Keep it to the point. It also forces you to distill your questions down to the things that are going to be the most important or relevant questions to ask the subject you're interviewing. The second thing is, I think that It's more effective because a lot of people who conduct interviews are going to be on camera, like a two-shot with the interview subject. It's actually very difficult to frame that and make it look good. This is just a fact. I personally think it's better to do it kind of television news style, where the interviewee is the only person on camera. So my suggestion is record a brief, if you're the interviewer, record a brief introduction and then literally cut to the person being interviewed and just have them on camera. Or if possible, don't appear on camera at all and just have the interview subject, because the point is that the subject is the star. That's the person that, somebody watching that video wants to hear what that person has to say. And the fact is sometimes it comes down to the ego of the interviewer wanting to actually be in the piece, and I understand that, and sometimes that's a reality, but I think as much as you can, encourage them to focus on the person being interviewed. Then, of course, this is a rule of thumb for interviews that is, I think, a lot of you will know, but it's a good thing to be reminded of. Have them include your answers in their questions. In fact, the gentleman recording the session came up and reminded me during the Q&A, make sure to repeat the question so that it's captured on camera, because you won't have a mic if you ask a question. So this way you can edit the interview without having to have you in it asking the questions. So, what do you think about streaming media technology? Well, it's like, what I think about streaming media technology is, and that kind of includes the question in the answer. And that way you can make a much more cohesive piece that way. So just kind of recap. Again, it's the outline of 5 questions. It's to introduce and get out of the way, because it's the person being interviewed that the audience wants to see. They're the star of the show, and have them include their questions, your questions in their answers. It's a lot to get through in a half hour. All right, audio. And as I mentioned, there's a reason why I'm putting audio before video, because I think for any content that's produced by a non-professional, the single most important, the easiest thing they can do to make the videos better is to just use a mic, seriously. There's a saying in video production, audio is half the picture. It's true. Good audio is the single most effective thing you can do, and it's relatively easy. And this is also something that's been proven in research and science, is that a viewer of a video will perceive that video to be better in quality if the audio quality is better. So before you worry about lighting or composition or exposure, audio, simply just using a microphone can just, my gosh, an incredible difference. So I actually had an example on my Mac, and I apologize because I had to switch over to the PC. I think without playing an example back, most of you in the room, if not all, have probably experienced this before. I was going to play you, something recorded with a camera mic and then with a lavalier. Never use the on-camera mic. That's the rule of thumb, I think. On-camera mics are great for reference. They don't record good quality audio. They're not really designed to. I think that something, and this is where I'm going to start making some suggestions. And by the way, I'm going to, as I go through this, throw up some pieces of gear that I've personally used, or that some of the companies I've consulted to that I've recommended that they use. Certainly it's not the only make or model, but something you can find similar products from other companies in similar price categories. However, it's not, I'm going to stick to things that are relatively inexpensive. I happen to like this particular lavalier mic because it plays very well with consumer-grade camcorders. I like the fact that it's wireless. I think wired lavs are a little cumbersome, especially in casual video production. But the point is that for under $100, you can basically get a microphone that is going to go just such a long way in terms of improving the quality of what the non-professionals in your organization are producing. And again, it's relatively cheap. This is a trick that I've used a few times, the Commando Lab, and that is simply a cell phone in the shirt or jacket pocket with the audio recording feature function. Now, the thing with that is, so basically, I could put a camera my phone right here, turn on an audio recording, and get a pretty darn good quality audio recording. The downside to that is then you have to sync that up in editing, and that, of course, is a little bit more of an advanced process for a non-professional. But in a pinch, it actually works. It's a kind of a neat little trick that you can employ, is using the audio recording function on your phone. Now, a few other rules with audio. Some of them are pretty straightforward, but you'd be surprised how many times people just don't think about this. Just shooting in a quiet space. That's a really big one. Background noise of any kind is distracting. It detracts from the quality of the audio. Having a balanced input level, not too low, not too high. Sometimes the challenge with that is that some of the cameras, especially the consumer-grade cameras, don't necessarily have the ability to adjust the audio level. So if the camera does have that ability, use the meters and adjust the level. If not, record a test clip first and play it back. I think it's always a great idea because most cameras today don't use tape. They record to some kind of file-based media. Have your laptop, record a test clip, bring it over, listen to it back on your headphones or whatever, and make sure it sounds good before you go forward and produce a bunch of content that later on you might find when you're editing it, it might not sound so great. So just to kind of recap, again, the point I made, I think, before is really important to remember. Audio is the single most effective thing you can do to improve the quality of videos. Decent wireless lav or handheld mic. Just the point is to not use the on-camera mic if at all possible. The Commando Lab, I kind of gave you that tip, but again, that has to be clap slated, which means when you start recording, clap so you have a spike in the audio you can sync up in editing. Shoot in a quiet space and set levels and record a test clip. All right, so now let's get down to shooting technique. I'm also going to check the time. All right, good. We're getting there, but I'm gonna go fast. This is, I think, a really important point. The shooter makes the shot, not the camera. Modern camcorders, cameras are generally all going to get you good quality. So it's really the technique in terms of shooting that's going to get you better quality more so than what camera you're using. Okay. So two key techniques I think that you can convey to your audience, composition and balance exposure. Some of the rules of composition, most of you know this, the rule of thirds, and it's a fundamental thing, the first fundamental thing that you can teach people. So your subject, put the eyes on the top third and center them to the left or right third. So for example, with Christina here, we've got, as you can see, her eyes kind of on the top third of the frame. We've got her centered. We have an alternate composition. Again, eyes in the top third off to the left or right. This is a 16:9 aspect ratio, even though our screen's crunching a little bit. And then also to frame from the chest up. And again, it's this really basic thing, but that's going to, again, go a long way in terms of visual quality. Most cameras do have a grid overlay where it will display that grid that I just showed you. So it makes it also much easier for someone who's just learning to compose effectively, use the grid overlay. And then the second thing is balanced exposure. And what that basically means is that the lighting on the subject and the background is in balance. The background isn't blown out, the foreground isn't blown out, that they're relatively in balance. So again, same shot, tweaked a little bit. So as you can see, obviously, way too backlit, blown out. Can't see our subject very well. Alternately, we've got her a little bit lit a little bit too hot here. The background type tends to fall away. And then really where we have that balance where not too bright, not too dark. Now this can be a little, the rule of thirds thing is easy. This can be a little bit more difficult when you're setting up a shot. Most natural lighting is enough, but there are a few things to remember. The first one is, make sure your subject's not backlit. Don't put them in front of the sun. Don't put them in front of something like a window with a lot of light behind it. Avoid white backgrounds, too, and because I find that also that can tend to blow out the picture. And also put distance between the subject and the background. I see a lot of videos where someone's up against a white wall, and it looks like a mugshot. It really does, or a driver's license photo. So some distance between the subject and background is really important. But this is the part, because I mentioned a moment ago, this can be a little harder to learn, is to just take the time to experiment. Move the camera around in different positions. Move the subject around in different positions. Eventually, you find something that works, but this is something that can take a little bit more time depending on the environment, depending on the lighting, right? And that's the point I just made right there. Of course, most cameras have the ability to adjust the exposure. This is part of the experimentation, move things around. And then, if necessary, supplementing with an on-camera light can be something useful. This is the one that we use with our DSLRs. It's a $200 light. The light panel, yeah, again, I'm sorry, the fonts kind of got chopped off there. Light panels kind of run. It's like not light pane LS, light panels micro. And that's also just for, and this is a lot of news crews use this on their television news crews use the same light. Now, in terms of cameras, as we're getting sort of towards being out of time here, again, these are just some recommendations of inexpensive gear that I think works well for non-professionals. Of course, most people are familiar with DSLRs. Canon's 5D is one of the kind of industry war horses. They do make cameras that shoot high-definition video that are lower in cost. The EOS Rebel, these days you can get with a 2-lens kit for about $600, and the quality is great, again, for user-generated content. This is a tripod also that we recommend for non-professionals. And again, I'm going to throw this, the slides are going to be up on the website if you can't get this down right now, but a $60 tripod. But kind of recapping the tips on shooting, because I just want to make sure we have enough time to get in the rest, because I've got about 2 minutes. Composition and balance exposure, rule of thirds, frame from the chest up, lighting and balance between the background and subject, avoid backlighting, put distance between the subject and background, take time to experiment, and that's the thing. It takes, sometimes you just have to try a few different things, and then to supplement with an on-camera light as necessary. All right, really quickly to wrap up, editing, less is more, as always. I think if you use that 5-minute rule of thumb, it's a lot easier in the editing process to throw things out. And if in doubt, cut it out. If you don't think it belongs there, it probably doesn't. Get rid of it. Forego the fancy graphic intro. Just fade it and go. It's a letdown to have seen this so many times. Really, people will invest in a really nice graphic introduction, and then it's like, lands on a shot that just doesn't look that great. And so, you can, for most pieces of content, just fade up and go. Get to the point. Stick to straight cuts. Don't do fancy transitions or dissolves. You can just cut. That's all you need. Any Simpsons fans will know. Star wipe to black. You don't need to do that. Just because the editing tool has those bells and whistles don't mean you have to use them. Having templates for tiles and lower thirds, especially if you are a brand, is really important. So getting your art department to crank out a Photoshop file with a lower third, or a template, or even some style guidelines in terms of fonts and font sizes for that is great. I mentioned the 50-point rule before. Large text is great. And then another tip in terms of editing, in a lot of cases, you don't really need to deliver 1080p video in online video scenarios. In many cases, you do. However, one technique that I think is really good to keep in mind is that if you shoot it at 1080 and edit it output in 720, you have many more pixels to work with, and you can do a technique called punching in, which basically means that, here I'll just show you, you can basically cut in, and not only does that give you some variance or variation in terms of being able to have, say, a medium close-up and an extreme close-up, it gives you the ability to cover edit points. So when you need to cut out a flub or whatever, you can cut to that tighter version of the shot by scaling it and make the video flow a lot better that way. So that's another tip. I think these days, loads of editing tools on the market. For most non-professionals, the simpler the better. I think that iMovie and Live Movie Maker, both for what most non-professional needs, are great, and they come with the software. They're free. For those that want to get a little bit more advanced, most educational institutions and many corporations already have a site license of a product like Adobe Creative Suite, which includes Premiere Pro. So it's not a bad idea to check with your IT folks and say, do we have a site license? You may already have a license that you could give to people without any additional cost. Of course, with editing, Just like rehearsing your presentation, just before you put it out there, have someone else look at it and give you feedback. They're probably going to let you know some things you can cut out to make it more succinct. I'm not going to go through and recap this again. We just covered this because I do want to get this done because we're out of time. But I think in terms of the gear, everything I showed you can be had for under $1,000. The camera and 2 lenses, tripod, microphone, on-camera light. And so basically you can get a great basic kit and make some awesome content. Although, remember, it's the craft that trumps the gear. If you're going to teach people how to produce video, focus on the skills that I've outlined and other skills in terms of the craft of producing rather than the gear. That's what's going to, I think, make the most difference. So we're out of time. Let's do some quick questions. Last thing, how do you teach them? Well, first of all, I think any organization has what I term heroes, people who are already doing this, that are doing a good job of it. Find them, identify them, get them to help you. Holding training sessions is a great idea. Forming an internal special interest group of people who are like-minded, who want to produce video. Getting them together on a regular basis, teaching them skills is great. Having an internal wiki or a blog, I think, is also a great way to get this stuff out. Of course, you can download the slides, but this is what I did at Adobe, is I made an intranet site and put a bunch of this kind of instructional material up there for people to see, and we had a monthly video meetup, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's getting the word out. That's my email address, of course, although I'm obviously here for the conference. Absolutely happy to discuss any of this stuff with you guys moving forward. And now that we're out of time, let's have, if any, questions. And I will repeat the questions so that they're captured on the video. In the back. Yes, sir. Yes. Yes, so the question was about blue screen and, maybe some tips around recording on blue screen. I honestly will say my first recommendation is if it's a non-professional, don't do it. Seriously. Yes, as you mentioned, sir, lighting is the most important thing, having an evenly lit scene and a screen, rather, and lit subject will get you the best quality. The DSLRs tend to give a pretty good ability to pull a key as long as you're recording at the highest quality the camera allows. And I think that the older formats, because some organizations have legacy formats like DV. DV was terrible for chroma keying. So I think that the rule of thumb will be record at the highest camera quality you possibly can and light it as best as you can. Although I honestly I really recommend, because nothing looks worse than a lousy keyed piece of video. Nothing makes it look less professional. I try to steer people away from it whenever possible. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. Any other questions? Okay. I really hope this was useful to you folks. Again, very, very grateful to have been here today, and thank you so much.